This episode was recorded before we changed the title of the podcast. It's the same podcast, bringing you behind the scenes of adult ed with a different name. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, hello, welcome. My name is Nadia Kader, and this is the NMAEA Podcast. I'm here today for a special episode with Juan Sanchez from Catholic Charities of Albuquerque. Hey, Juan.
Hi, Nadia and Jamie.
And Jamie's here. Yeah, I apologize. I zone in on what I'm supposed to say, and I forget about Jamie. But yes, Jamie's here. Hi, Jamie.
Hello.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this project and for featuring also a special on high school equivalency in Spanish.
Yes. So that is something that we've been, for this podcast, we've been really interested in just looking at as much aspects of adult ed as we can. And if I'm not mistaken, Spanish HSE is not done by a lot of programs in New Mexico. Is that correct?
I believe it is in the Albuquerque area we do it. And I don't know if CNM has a component of it.
They might, yes.
Mm-hmm. And then I know in the state, Doña Ana, it has a significant component of their offering. It's for Spanish High School Equivalency and as well as ESL. And I haven't done the survey of who offers it outside Albuquerque or in the state as a whole. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
So this just came up just from what you were saying. And I'm sorry, this is not part of our question, but I'm just thinking and this is a dumb question, but what are the benefits of us having the high school equivalency in Spanish?
Yes, that question comes up a lot. And many people that would benefit from taking it in Spanish may have that question, because ultimately you want this to be a step in the process of being active in the U.S. society, economy, maybe going for further studies, post-secondary education. So it's a fair question to say, are you doing a disservice or, retarding that process by granting the degree through testing in Spanish? At the same time, in my own experience, I see that many people concurrently take ESL to skill up on their general English language skills and do the high school equivalency in Spanish. And by the time, if they concurrently take both, they're ready to move to post-secondary. Maybe they have those tools in their hands, in their resumes, to move on. I think significant factor is that most ESL programs, even though they have components of building academic vocabulary, that's not really the main mission. The main mission is developing functional language skills that can be used right away outside the classroom. And even though the ELPS standards have an emphasis on developing academic domain language, that's not really the center. And the high school equivalency certificate is really a whole degree. If you take into account all the language that you have to acquire for biology, earth science, chemistry, physics, social studies, it's really a tremendous undertaking. So I would say that as long as they're committed to learning English, it's not a substitute or a different parallel universe where you don't learn English. They're still encouraged to take ESL classes, but at the same time, it shortens that distance to have this credential that will open other doors.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So I did get a little ahead of myself because I was just really excited to just hear about, this is something I don't have any experience with. Personally, I haven't worked in a program that has Spanish HSE, so this is all new territory.
Yeah. If I may add to that, I think there are other components. We use the same standards, the same academic standards. It's not one set for Spanish HSE versus English HSE. It's exactly the same thing. Actually, the test is the same. The test is developed in English and then translated into Spanish. It's exactly the same. So if one person goes to take a test and there's a reading from, I don't know, Moby Dick, the same thing is going to be in the Spanish version of the test. So it's exactly the same. If we talk about transferable skills, the skills are the same. And a lot of the language arts is the same standard. So it would be conventions of the Spanish language that are consistent with the equivalent ones in the English language. And you know how we hear about is strengthening one's first language literacy as also a benefit for mastering a second language. And the other thing is the demographic situation of the United States. I mean, I'll take as an example my parents. They're both U.S. citizens. They participate in our democracy. They're up to date with their news and all that. But their English is probably not sufficient to get that level of sophisticated kind of connection to current affairs. There's all the major newspapers in this country have Spanish language editions. So there's no lack of input for them to be active participants in this society with their limited English. So what am I saying here? Literacy and learning, if that's the shortest route that you can take because that's your linguistic situation, your English is not good enough to progress academically, many people, learning to write a 5-paragraph essay and how you paragraph, what's the formal components behind that. If you learn it in Spanish, that's already something that you can apply to your beginning, I guess, English composition when you go to college or whatever your next step.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'll be honest, I just haven't considered that. I really didn't. And just thinking of that process of learning English, but then also learning English well enough to take an academic test, that's so much time. So it's like someone would have to go through an ESL program, which however long it takes, depending on where they are, right, in their English learning, and then going through an HSE program, that could be many, many years. And yeah, who knows like how long that would stall their process, because our goals in adult education is not just getting the certificate, getting the degree, getting whatever. It's what you do with that. So going that route could stall out people's goals and, taking care of themselves and their families. So that's really the point.
Exactly. And a fair question also is what happens to other language minorities, right? If your first language is Vietnamese, unfortunately, the only two languages that are represented in with the publishers, the HSE, GD, is Spanish and English. And again, I think it has to do with the continental demographic situation, the millions that would benefit from that. And ultimately with the publishers, it's corporations. So it's about the customer base as well.
Yeah, it would probably theoretically take many, many years to get to a point of where we have multiple language options. And even then it would have to be, well, frankly, let's be real, there'd have to be people fighting for that, because that's the decision is, well, who's asking for it? Because you can make if you're not looking, you can make that argument that there's no one telling me that they need the HSE in Vietnamese, right? But how would that person, how would that group, of course, there are large pockets of Vietnamese immigrants scattered across the United States. So that's just one group. There's so many more. Yeah,
and
but
if we get political with the language of the United States, there's also some people would argue, the Spanish language is not a foreign language in a sense, because even where we're speaking right now, the Spanish language was used for politics and institutions way before this became part of the United States. I'm talking about the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of Texas, Florida, California. So there are some variables there that can be used to make a case for Spanish as having even more ground to. It's a heritage language for many people that are not migrants. I had a worker who was a storyteller, a bilingual storyteller from northern New Mexico, Paulette Atencio. And people would ask her, so you were born in Mexico? No, I've lived in New Mexico, and generations before me, we are New Mexicans, and we are Spanish speakers and English speakers. So it's not a foreign language for many U.S.-born Americans.
Yeah, New Mexico is in a really unique place in that it is one of the oldest occupied, would you call it a territory? Before it was a state. So occupied areas that have many generations here, but yes, you're right, like have always been bilingual, and that's very unique in the United States, as far as I know. So yeah, that's also a fair point. It's like, how is Spanish foreign in a state where people have been speaking Spanish longer and older than other states? So that's something to really, consider in our unique situation. So I would like to take a step. This is great, but I would like to go all the way back, just step back. Juan, let's learn a little more about you. Yeah, tell us just a little bit about yourself, and how did you get into adult ed?
Yes, I was born in Cuba. I lived there until I was 22. I came to this country in 1995, lived in Miami for a number of years. I went to school there. I went to Florida International University. My undergrad was in philosophy, and then I did a master's in religious studies. When I say religious studies, people think that's like where you're going to be a priest or something. Religious studies in the state school is really the academic study of religion. And that was the portal for my first experience of a classroom, meaning teaching. I was a TA while in the master's program, and taught kind of a survey course for undergrads on the world religions, the history of Buddhism, Hinduism, all of that. And then didn't like it. Then I had another educational experience in Texas. I lived in Houston as a classroom instructor for kids in a program that they sheltered unaccompanied minors. It was from the Office of Refugees of the United States. So the kids that crossed the border unaccompanied, they were there until through case management, they could reunite them with a family member. But while being in the shelter, they needed, all the services that a kid that age, recreation, outings, sports, and education. So that was a little more satisfying experience. And then while in Houston also, I started alternative certification it was a certification for early childhood through 6 bilingual educator. I got a temporary license and even started at a school, but I didn't like it either. And then I didn't know that adult education was like kind of a discrete field with its own kind of body of everything, legislation, regulations, theory, a tradition, a professional identity. When I moved to New Mexico, I saw the posting for an adult education instructor at Catholic Charities. It piqued my curiosity. I applied, and then it's been wonderful. I've been for 6 years working in the same program, and it's so different from an elementary school setting or the other settings. And, learning that this is not just something that someone had the initiative to teach adults, but it is a cohesive field with, as I said, a professional identity was like a great discovery. I said, well, if I had known before, maybe I would have geared my process towards here. It just happened, but it's been a great fit, and I hope to retire as an adult educator.
Fingers crossed. Actually, that's really funny that we have some similarities. I have a master's in cinema studies, so not a filmmaker, but academic study. And that's actually how I started teaching. I was a TA, and I was an adjunct for a while, and I didn't like it either. The academic study of media. And then I kind of found myself in adult education too. So I think that's kind of funny that we have that. Yeah. That's cool. And kind of fell into adult ed and kind of moved in from there too. So that's exciting. And I think there's really only a handful of people I've met who say confidently that I knew about adult ed and I intentionally went into this as a field. But yeah, there's really like this professional identity as an adult educator. It's so different from working with children.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, some of the more obvious stuff, but even just connecting the students and the certain contents to really wonderful. And I'm glad you're here. Yeah, the few times that we have talked, in different groups and stuff, I'm always just really just interested in your passion, what little I've seen, because we've only met a few times, but just good times. It's just been really excellent to hear. That's why I'm really happy to have you today and just to learn more about this field. Yeah. So
I'm glad to be part of this conversation too.
Absolutely. You said your official job title is adult educator.
Yes, / lead instructor. So yeah, it would be HSE instructor, and I've been serving the department in other duties, and I guess the agency, the classification is program coordinator, but kind of the flavor of that is lead instructor.
Okay, so it's kind of like teaching / admin role, like kind of mixed together.
Exactly. Yeah.
That happens. Those are interesting jobs too.
Yes. And that's another factor of adult education. Unless we are not part of a college, so it's an independent program within a larger agency. So we don't have a lot of positions that are exclusively administrative. It's like everybody wears several hats at the same time. Recruitment, advertisement, placement of students, all the initial intake, all of that, everybody does a little. And then, keeping records. And so the administrative functions are sort of enmeshed into the main duty of instruction and working with the students directly.
Yeah, there's a lot of how would you say, like, give and take with these kind of positions. I think one of the benefits of that is that keeps the administrator who's still teaching really just like having a hand in both, and just like when you're working on these administrative duties, you really have that frame of reference, like these students, I'm helping these students that I also teach, right?
Yeah.
And getting this kind of idea, so that is always really beneficial. And then understanding, admin are basically like they usually create the structure, or Jamie, would you say that, like, create the structure, maintain the structure? What would you phrase?
Or maybe, like creating that and facilitating it with feedback. And I think, getting back to what you were saying, Juan, about wearing those multiple hats, I did that for many years, taught and, worked in admin. And so I completely understand. And I didn't want to lose my connection with the students. So, even when I stopped teaching in the classroom, I still did orientations. So, I know that you feel that too. You are able to, in my opinion, really serve the students better when you have that connection with the students and you maintain that. And I think that's one of the advantages of being in a community-based organization as opposed to, maybe a larger institution. You have that opportunity, and Catholic Charities is unique in that way.
Yeah,
absolutely.
How many students on average would you say take the Spanish HSE exam per year in your program?
Yeah, I was looking at that question, Jamie, and then I wasn't sure if to interpret it as people that actually take the official test or people that enroll in our courses, because there's a difference there. There's a gap, right? But
right.
So what about for either? Like, what is your enrollment versus how many per year would take the test?
Yeah, to an overview of the program, we have high school equivalency, and some of those are in English, some of that are in Spanish. This term, for example, we have 4 in English and 5 in Spanish. So before it has been more like, sometimes we have had 6 in Spanish and 3 in English. It's always more in Spanish than English. I guess it has to do with the identity of our center or the location in town, or a little tradition that has formed around the services at Catholic Charities, but it's usually a little higher in Spanish than in English. So I got some numbers here from Rodrigo, our data person, said that in 2023, 2024, there were 102 and 21 dropped. But the previous year or cycle, 2022 to 23, it was 130 enrolled and 68 that dropped. So that's significant, that figure, because I did the math and it's like 52% that actually dropped that year. So it varies. I guess there are many factors that sometimes it's hard to identify the variables, but more or less like that, over 100 would be the case. Now, for that clarification that I made before about the ones that take the test, this is one experience I have about many of the students that come, is that many of them didn't have even a middle school component in their education. So it takes many semesters for them to skill up enough to even do well in a practice test as an indicator that they will do well in the official test. So that is one reality. And others that very quickly are ready to test for some subject or block of subjects, but not for one. Math, for example, is one area where some people need to take the course multiple times before they feel ready. In some cases, writing for some others. So,
well, I was just going to ask just for clarification. So, how many time? Like, how long are the courses generally?
Yes, I can speak about the way I structure my scope and sequence. I typically, for example, come August, I'm going to be teaching Mondays and Wednesdays a cohort that we do reading. Then we move to reading and writing combined. And then another module that is kind of data analysis for science and social studies. And then at the end is like workshops for writing.
Okay.
So that's one track. So potentially a person could, and typically what I do is that most of our students take high set rather than GED. So how that affects the pacing is that I can teach like foundational reading skills, reading interpretation, reasoning through text analysis as a module that might be like, a few weeks. And then do like a practice test and use that to determine getting vouchers for testing for that. So that's some students finish and pass it and move on. Others still need to retake it, but then we move on to the next module.
Okay.
There's a break, and not a break in the sense of a mini vacation, but there is a finishing of that and then taking the practice test and then getting vouchers, getting to testing. But one advantage that we have now is that we have our own testing center, and we survey the situation in the Albuquerque metro area, and we realized that we needed to offer it in the evenings after 6 for people that work during the day, and also to have an option during the weekend. So we also offer the test on Saturdays at 10. And we do either GED or high set. But again, that's one. Going back to the original question, I think, Nadia, you posed the question. So that's one track. That's what I do Mondays and Wednesdays. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays is math. And that one is like the whole thing. Now, because our students that take high school equivalency in Spanish are English language learners, sometimes what they prefer to do is like a half and half. If they can come in the morning, they can come with me, for example, Mondays and Wednesdays for high school equivalency, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays for ESL. And then
interesting.
That's going to slow down the process, because if somebody else has the priority to do high school equivalency first, concentrate on that, they can come Monday through Thursday, and do like a full-time, including math and the other components, and potentially graduate by the end of the term. Now, that will depend on many other factors. Like if they had, in a classroom, I may have students that had the fifth grade education. That's all they had. Then someone that even went to university in their country. So the whole spectrum. I tend to plan like a 60% in the middle, with like 20% on the lower end and 20% on the higher end. But the synergies that happen is not like an exact. I don't segregate people by abilities. I try to push everybody to the middle, but then giving those faster, a little more to work with at the higher end of the spectrum, but also something at the lower end of the spectrum, but so that there's everybody walks away with something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was able to perform and I was able to finish these activities. But clearly, and in part of my syllabus, what I explain what factors will determine that you finish this in a semester or more. Things like previous education. If you're an avid reader, maybe someone didn't have formal schooling up to high school, but likes to read or have a natural ability for math. And I told them, adult education is humans don't learn only through books or in a classroom. We're constantly learning. Every day that we live, we learn. And you yourself are a migrant. That's like a degree. You have to kind of learn so many new codes, learn so many new ways of being in the world and being effective in your life, that all of that, I try to empower students by having them acknowledge how much they know. That is not necessarily bookish or classroom learning.
Okay, that is really interesting. So the reason why I asked about that in terms of courses, because I've primarily as an instructor worked in organizations where we had like, maybe not semesters, but basically we did have little breaks, but the courses never really ended. Basically, people could come to my class and someone can come for like, a month and then go, if they're ready, they go take a test, or they could be maybe 2 years and just keep, it's just like continuing nonstop. So that's why it's interesting to hear about your modules kind of idea. I also like that flexibility of giving students the option of doing half and half ESL, HSC, or going full HSC, and maybe ESL coming before or after that. That's really interesting. I also, your mention of keeping the factors of what their trajectory might look like. One of the things when I was teaching before I transitioned out is that kind of, it took a while. Sometimes I'm a little, it takes me a little while, it's slow realization that some students really do have this, they don't have a time frame in mind, or they have a time frame, but they don't always tell you. And then you as the instructor has to figure that out. And sometimes you have those, you're in a program, in a situation where you have that time to really work with the student on that. Sometimes, like Jamie mentioned earlier, you're in a large institution and it's like if you have 30 students in your class, thinking about that and thinking about what that could mean, because, someone coming in and realizing that this is not something they can just come in and take a test. And I had one student come in and say, I thought this program was I come in and I take the test. Like they had no idea that there was that separate. And it's really just, how do we convey that information and talking about timeframes? Because, they had a very clear idea in their head. They just didn't verbalize it until much later of like, oh, I didn't know what this was. I didn't know what I was signing up for, essentially.
Yeah, that is a very interesting topic, because I had a recent example, a student that came and said, I am in this line of work and they really want me to graduate soon. So I need this quickly. So yes, I said, well, I'm going to give you access to all the lessons so that you can go at your own pace. And then we were doing math, and I was trying to keep it like a pacing consistent with finishing by the end of the academic term. And then this student would complain, oh, but you're going too fast. I'm thinking, so we're talking about two different things here: graduating soon and then covering all these, getting all these skills, but it's what it takes. So I saw the adjustment happening, saying, okay, yeah, I have to readjust my expectations, because it takes real time to develop these skills. Yeah. It's not something that I can instance, because I wish it's so hard. It just takes time and effort. But I try to design or lesson plan before the students get there with a certain time goal in mind. Mm-hmm. And then there are all the individual variations, right? So I think you have to do like 2 tracks. You have to design for this anonymous person that you haven't met yet, and what are your outcomes that you want out of the process, and it takes place in time. There's only so many weeks before Christmas, right? Yeah. And then you have to adjust it for individual learners that might need a little more reinforcement at the basic skill level, or to speed it up for the others. But so I believe in this kind of middle point, and then sort of elastic.
I like that phrase, right? It's just because we do, a really big skill for instructors has to be adaptation. Whether you're taught that in your if you have a degree in education or not, if you're taught that, but that's definitely just such a important skill that we have to develop as educators, just hands down. This interview will continue on the next part of this episode. Thank you for listening to the NMAEA Podcast. Connect with Adult Ed, the NMAEA Podcast, is a project of the Propel Professional Learning System and is funded by the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division. Thank you for listening.